And in my case, we should have our quilts.
Oh,
Yeah. There you go.
Did I just hear my,
We'd have to finish.
did I just hear my wife quoting scripture that Baptists can't change seats?
It's really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes you go to another church, you look at everything sits.
It'll be here before you know it.
Yeah. So good morning, good to be with you. Welcome to our adult Sunday school for our first Sunday in September, the 1st of September. So let's get our share going here. Our wonderful Google Earth. As much as I'm not a Google fan, I do appreciate being able to use Google Earth for these purposes. So we are in the book of Genesis. Excuse me, not Genesis. Wasn't that a great book? We are in the book of Exodus. We are in the book of Exodus, chapter 14-ish. And we are going through the Bible timeline and have arrived at the Exodus. And the Israelites have finally exited out of Egypt and are on their way to, good morning, and they are on their way to the sea crossing and Mount Sinai, and from there to the promised land. But they're not there yet. We actually left them in Etham on last Sunday, so that's where we'll be picking up. So it's the year 1446 BC, Middle Bronze Age 2, A going into B. We're about right at that threshold there where they switch, move on down. China is being led by Emperor Ren of the Shang dynasty, their second dynasty after the Xia dynasty. The Pharaoh of Egypt is Pharaoh Dudamos II of their 13th dynasty. He's in their second intermediate period. Egypt had their old kingdom with the pyramids. That was a couple centuries before Abraham. Then they had their first intermediate period after the old kingdom. Then they had their middle kingdom, which had Joseph's Pharaoh, Amenemhat III, who had his dreams. And so that was another high point for Egypt. Now they're after the middle kingdom in another kind of a dip, a little low point, the second intermediate period in between the middle kingdom. And what's going to be coming in the future is the new kingdom. That new kingdom of Egypt will have King Tut, will have Ramses the Great, and all of them, and we'll get to them as we go. So right now, Pharaoh of the Exodus is Dudamos II, 13th dynasty, second intermediate period. In the Bible lands, Babylon is being led by King Amidatana. He's the great-grandson of the famous Hammurabi with his law code. We'll compare that with the law of Moses, the law of God through Moses. And right at about this point in time, in the line of Christ, we have Aminadab, who I put at 98 years old right now, and his son Nahshon, I put at about 39. And Nahshon will be the leader of the tribe of Judah as they head out on this Exodus. So we have the timeline outside the Bible, courtesy of Egyptologist David Roll. We have the Exodus route that we are following, courtesy of Dr. Glenn Fritz. And let's see, so quick recap. We are, let's do this. So the 10th plague happened on the 14th of the Hebrew month Nisan, also known as Abib. As strike of midnight, the plague, the 10th and final plague, the death of the firstborn happened, including the death of the firstborn of Pharaoh. His firstborn son was in his late 20s when he was struck by this. And so the very next day, the 15th of the month of Nisan, they set out. And in that one day, they traveled from here over to Succoth, about 23 miles. Here. There you go. And so from Succoth, hop, skip, and a jump over here. They then went following a line up here to the Katmia Pass, which they reached. Right here. They went from Succoth to, so I'm gonna go back one. Okay, from there. Whee! Hope no one gets air sick. So we'll go over here to the El Tasa. There we go, that makes sense. From Succoth, they make it to El Tasa. Succoth was 23 miles. And Altasa is now another 31 miles. They reach it on day 4, so they've gone 54 miles total to get to this point. Next, they go to the Katmia Pass, as you see up there. From the Katmia Pass, they go on to Bir Gifgafa. The Katmia Pass was another 19 miles, 73 total, day 6. Pharaoh's been in pursuit now. We left about 4 days after they did. He's moving faster and catching up to them. So day 7, they come to Bir Gifgafa here. Got another 16 miles, 89 total. Let's see here. Bink. By day 9, they've gone from Gifgafa over here to Bir el-Thamada, another 26 miles, so they've gone 115 miles in 9 days. By day 10, they've made it around here to the Wadi El Arish, another 23 miles, 138 total. By day 12, they made it over here to the mouth of this area here, the Wadi Mashedi, another 39 miles, 177 total in 12 days. And another 2 days where we left off, they have gone from the mouth of the Wadi Mashedi to Etham, which is mentioned in the Bible. And the Bible mentions they went from Succoth to Etham. It doesn't mention the places in between. It does not say that Etham was the next day after Succoth. That's also often a misconception here. The Bible does not give the time frame for this, for how long it took to get to Etham, or what we do know is that by the 30th day, they were in the wilderness of sin. So this kind of fills in the blanks there. So we've arrived at Etham, going another 28 miles. They're now 205 miles that they've traveled in 2 weeks, 14 days to reach Etham over here. So this is where we left off last week. So they're making their way from Etham. And remember, Moses in his travels, he came from Midian and Mount Sinai around the top here of the Gulf of Aqaba. He came around here. First of all, he ran away from Egypt, came over here to Midian, then was called by God at the burning bush at Mount Sinai, came back over here to Egypt. Now he's leading the people, and I'm sure it's a natural assumption for Moses that God's going to just lead him right over there, the same place that Moses was familiar with. Not so. God tells them that they're going to have a different approach here in Etham, and it's not going to go according to what they might have thought or planned. So let's see here. So starting from where they were in the land of Goshen at Tel el-Daba of Aris, they have gone up almost in fact, they have gone up to an elevation here at Etham of 2,290 feet over their 200 plus miles. So talking about Etham here. And Pharaoh's just about 11 miles behind them now. So all of this excitement, let's recap of Exodus chapter 14, first couple verses. Exodus 14, verse 1. All is going according to plan until this happens. Exodus 14, verse 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, tell the sons of Israel to turn back and camp, and let me quote this here, facing Pi-hahiroth, which is located between Migdal and the sea, and faces Baal-zephon. You shall camp by the sea straight away from it. That might sound a little different from the phrasing in your translations, and we'll get to that. Verse 3, for Pharaoh will say of the sons of Israel, they are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after them. And I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. And they did so. So let's go back to Etham here. Stop right there. So Moses is expecting, I imagine they're going to go straight on through. God says, no, you're going to turn here. Well, there's a problem with this turn. It's a dead end right there at the sea, going into this place in this wilderness. And again, wilderness doesn't mean desert. Wilderness just means uninhabited, a kind of abandoned, empty area. It can be a desert, but it's not required to be a desert. And so Pharaoh says, aha, they're going to be trapped over there. We've got them now. Of course, we know how the story goes. We talked last week about, and Brother Clay brought up a great point. You know, if I got whooped by God 10 times, I might, cry uncle and say, okay, which he did when he let the Israelites go. But then he got his stand up and said, no, we're not settling for this. We're not letting them have the final say. And so they take off after them. Pharaoh himself leading the 600 plus chariots. And so I appreciate Brother Clay saying, that might have been enough for me to say, I'm just going to move on from this one. But we're also told that God is still hardening Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh had kept hardening his own heart up to the point to where God said, that's it. There's no more hope for you. And again, this is very important for us to understand. This is something only God knows. We have no way of knowing this for anyone. So just for the record, my approach towards any human being under the face of the sun, I don't care who they are or how bad or evil they are, while there's breath, there's hope. I am in no position or authority to declare that there is no hope or that their heart is done. That's God. And I pray that it isn't. Just as the Lord was patient for me, coming around and gave me time to draw close to him, I want that for everyone. And so very important that we have the heart set where we are trusting God and leaving those things to him and desiring God's best for anyone and everyone.
Sure.
Yes, Sister Ashley.
But I agree with you, but that's why it's important that you keep your eyes on God,
Yes.
right? Because you can't worry about what other people are doing. And obviously I'm
Good point.
bringing it down to a smaller scale.
No, it relates.
Because if you're worrying about, well, is this one's heart hard, or what's he doing over there, then you're not focusing on what God may have for you. And then
Great
you're also
point.
not letting the Lord deal with that person either. You could be getting in the way of the Holy Spirit, or you could be doing things that, God might not want you to be doing in your life, So that's something I hadn't thought about before, because a lot of times we're so focused on what the other person is doing and where they are, we're not thinking about it. It distracts us from, because if Moses wasn't listening to God, he wouldn't know where to be leading these people. And we
Right.
already know, where Moses didn't listen to God.
Right.
So.
Well, great stuff. Gehazi, Elijah's servant, saying, I'm not letting Naaman the Syrian get away with that. Yeah, I'm not letting him get off scot-free. Well, how about leaving Naaman to God and you focus on what God has for you, Gehazi? Yeah, great point. I appreciate that.
And I'm sorry, just another thought, we see that in the political world, in the military world.
Oh, yeah.
With all the unrest and stuff, that's why, so many times we pray for our politicians, we pray for our troops.
Amen.
Because we do need to focus on, on a smaller scale, but then spiraling out of that, it affects things on a grander scale as well, and this was obviously, I would hate to think of somebody chasing 600 chariots,
Right.
I mean, that's that's the whole power of the government, coming against you, and those aren't, good odds.
And here's another great point to a question Clay had last week, Brother Clay. Even after all their whoopings and all the destruction that ensued in the course of those 10 plagues, Egypt was still strong enough to muster 600 chariots? Yeah. So the great toll that was taken upon them, they still were strong enough to do this. So that shows just even in their intermediate period, in between the middle and new kingdoms, how powerful it was. This is the biggest, most powerful nation in the world right now, even at this lower point for them. So yeah, I appreciate those thoughts very, very much. We're also told in Numbers, just one verse, Numbers 33, verse 7. Numbers chapter 33 is also a record of the travels here. Numbers 33, verse 7, we're told, they journeyed from Etham and turned back to Pi-hahiroth, which faces Baal-zephon, and they camped before Migdol. So we're going to talk about all these different locations and how it all lays out here. So here's a thought, courtesy of Dr. Glenn Fritz on all this. Since a divine command was given at the Etham camp to turn toward the sea, see this in Exodus 14, verse 2, Numbers 33, 7, the environs would need to offer a passable route to a coastal location suited to a multitude. Again, we're talking about up to 2.5 million people here, men, women, children, and their flocks and herds and all of that, and their wagons and whatever. So what I like to keep coming back to is not if this really happened, but since this really happened, it had to have really happened in a way that worked, and we can see and trace it out. Now, some things are clear supernatural miracle provisions from God. He made sure rain was falling. That was quoted in the Psalms. The crossing of the Exodus Sea. There's nothing but a miraculous movement of God that could have accomplished that. And we'll get to that when we get there. But getting to there, we see it's reasonable, feasible, and realistic for even 2.5 million people to have made this travel in this time, going about 15.5 miles a day to arrive here and to make it as God is describing. So it really happened, and we can really see it, is the point. So again, and we'll talk about all these words here in chapter 14, verse 2. While they're at the Etham encampment, and by the way, let me do this. So down there is Midian, and over here is Mount Sinai. And the promised land is just up over that way. So, but rather than going, do a quick refresh here. Rather than just going straight over to Mount Sinai and heading straight up, Lord's saying, no, on this side of the Gulf, I want you to turn. Yeah. So there we see the promised land, and there we see Mount Sinai. And here they are at Etham, making this turn here to go into there. Let's talk about some of these things. So while they're at the Etham encampment, the divine command is given to turn, proceed to encamp over by the sea. This instruction was again referenced in Numbers. Both verses use the Hebrew word shuv, which means to return or turn back. So this is a significant change of course. It's not just a slight, veer. This might sound familiar from our Wednesday night classes. The word shuv for return, the Jewish holy day in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Tishri the 1st and Tishri the 10th. The Saturday that falls in there is a special Sabbath. It's called Shabbat Shuvah, the day of return. And in fact, the big revival that Messianic Jewish Rabbi Jonathan Cahn held in DC in September of 2020, that happened to fall on the day of the return. So it's a very significant, those 10 days are very powerful holy days for the Jewish folks. And so that word shuv is a big deal, to return, to turn back, to go a different direction from where you were headed. So it's almost like a 90-degree turn there we see there. So get that to refresh again, pretty significant. So the total difference here, the total distance, I should say, going from Etham to the sea, from here to there, is about 67 miles. One more refresh here. So about 4 days of travel. Okay, we'll just cheat it and go over here. Close you. Open you. Whenever something goes wrong with anything Microsoft, just reset, restart. Seems to be you ever call tech support, that's the first thing they'll say. Did you try restarting? So here we are over at Etham, right there. Please do.
I think that manipulate God party Pharaoh's heart.
Oh yeah, let's talk about that.
God moved this thing,
Yeah, 100% correct.
but show those people in Egypt that he was God.
Right.
And I think that having gone on the terms of like past the point where somebody saying, well, yeah, what are you doing here? I think they keep going for that. It's like even the less believing God guys say,
Right.
yes, and I think that when they thought they had the Israelites trapped, this was a trap that God was leading the Egyptians into to further decimate Egypt, as he had with them giving all their money and all jewelry and all that. And to the Israelites, this is also going to help decimate Egypt.
Absolutely. Great point. This was not a trap for Israel. This was a trap for Egypt. And one of the things too, that I'm talking about Pharaoh again, in this case, due to Moses II here. Very important that we understand God does not override free will. He has authority and ability to do so. He chooses not to. He knows when a free will choice is set in stone, he's like, okay, that's it. Final nail in the coffin then. And he knew that with Pharaoh. In fact, we go from at the beginning of the plagues to Pharaoh telling, but when Pharaoh told Moses, who is your God that I should acknowledge or consider or serve him? To now, the end of verse 4 of Exodus 14, God says, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So God does things for a reason. And so the whole world's going to know. This is going to reverberate. What's going to happen when the Israelites, the spies, go to Jericho? Rahab tells them, our hearts have melted because your God is with you. We know what happened in Egypt. We know what you've done to the nations on your way up to here. So yeah, we're panicking here. We recognize something here. So let's see. So there they are going up to Etham. Now we're going to go down from Etham. Whee! So there's 67 miles. So about 4 days travel coming down from Etham to the beach, which is known as Nuweiba. So let's talk about some of these names here. Isn't that the truth? So we're going to be going, our next stop from Etham, we're going to go to Pi-hahiroth. So sometime after this turn at Etham, the Hebrews become entangled in the land, shut in by the wilderness, leading Pharaoh to perceive that the Hebrews are going to be an easy prey. Moses' reference to this scenario, again, this is Dr. Glenn Fritz here, implies that someone in Pharaoh's ranks was familiar enough with the terrain to say, aha, they're stuck, they're at a dead end. Even though this is kind of far away from Egypt, we're a couple 100 miles outside. The prospect of being entrapped by the wilderness easily applies, and we're going to dive in here, to the confines of these canyons. It's called the Wadi Watir canyons. And they terminate at a narrow gap west of this Nuweiba beachhead that we're going to go to. So let's talk about these names in chapter 14, verse 2. Pi-hahiroth. It's actually pronounced Pi-hahiroth. I'm not going to remember to say it that way, so I'm just going to say it the way it looks in English. That name, and it could literally mean mouth of the caves. Therefore, opening of the caves would be an acceptable understanding of that name. The literal meaning of Pi-hahiroth could easily be applied to the distinctive character of this Wadi Watir here. In fact, we can zoom in here and take a look and see. It's going to be kind of a canyon that they're going into here. The lack of sunlight in the deep confines of the Wadi's serpentine canyon is reminiscent of a cave. Numerous adjoining blind canyons reinforce the idea of caves. But in modern terminology, Wadi Watir is actually more like a tunnel. It has two openings, one in the north that they're coming in through, and one that they're going to be coming out of on the shore there, facing the sea. I didn't know this. In the biblical Hebrew vocabulary, there are no words that distinctly mean tunnel. The modern Hebrew word that we see used for tunnels, nekeva or menhara, that appear in the Hebrew Bible, they actually don't carry the meaning of tunnel in any way. Also, biblical Hebrew does not use the mouth, the Pi-hahiroth, the pi, that first part of it means mouth. They do not use that to describe rivers. Rosh is the head of the rivers. So that's how we know where the Garden of Eden was, because it describes it as where the heads of the rivers are. So we're able to trace back to the heads of the rivers and see, just like Moses describes it. There's actually a mistake in Joshua 15:5 in many translations where it's described as the mouth of the river. It's actually not. And so on from there. So what does all this mean? If Pi-hahiroth refers to the Wadi Watir here, the northern opening, the entry point used by the Hebrews and the Egyptians following them is logically the mouth of this canyon here. That makes sense. And the biblical meaning of Pi-hahiroth suggests it only applies to this entry point here and not the entire wadi here. So this is just the mouth, the entrance here. Everyone good so far? Makes sense. Cool. Now let's talk about some of these other references here, which is actually pretty cool. The common and key point in Exodus 14, verse 2, verse 9, Numbers 33:7 is that Pi-hahiroth here faces Baal-zephon. Well, what's Baal-zephon? We've talked about it once upon a time, but let's refresh. Let's go to Baal-zephon. After a quick word from our sponsor. Baal, what is Baal? Baal-zephon. Anyone? When you hear Baal, what do you think? The other god, absolutely right. Zephon is actually the word for north. So we talk about Baal-zephon, we're talking about a place of Baal worship that was in the north. So this is what we're going to see here. Maybe not today, but this is what we're going to see. And yeah, I got that plugged in. Yep, we're all cooked up there. Let's see. Boom, 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 boom. Yep. So my apologies for that. But Baal-zephon is actually a mountain further north that was in the land of Canaan and Syria, in that area, that was such a big mountain and such a famous mountain for its worship, basically just like the Greek gods on Mount Olympus with Zeus and his group of gods. That's what Baal-zephon was like up here for the gods of this area of Canaan and Syria and all that. So it's a famous reference point. And what we'll eventually see is that looking from Pi-hahiroth, Baal-zephon is directly north of it. So the mouth of the caves or the canyon faces Baal-zephon. So when we read the reference here in the Bible, that fits, and that's what it's referring to, and it makes sense. So, and Exodus 14, verse 2, and Numbers 33:7 sounds slightly different because one's talking about the start of the canyon, the other's talking about the end of the canyon. And so Exodus 14, verse 2 is talking about from Etham going into the canyon. Numbers 33, verse 7 is looking back, saying that they camped before Migdol, and we'll take a look at Migdol, looking back towards the canyon that they came out of. So we're going to see these landmarks all fit and make sense together exactly the way the Bible describes them. So the Hebrew word for Zephon for north could very well come from Baal-zephon, the name of this mountain here, that was a northern point of reference. And so they just shortened Zephon for north, and people know what they're talking about. So like when Ashley and I are talking about directions, we'll talk about east or is this east or west? Well, is it going towards the mountains or is it going towards the ocean? Towards the mountains is east, towards the ocean is west. And so that kind of helps us keep a perspective there. So Baal-zephon, when Moses records it here, is basically a reference to that mountain saying, okay, it's toward the north. So that's where they are. So they're going to go into these canyons on their way to the beach, and we'll see that the canyon walls kind of rise up. If you've seen the Star Wars movies on Tatooine with them going through the canyons, that's kind of what it looks like here. And we'll actually take our camera and go down in there as well. And so about 40 miles into it, the canyon walls start rising. And this is actually because of the geological transition. They're going from sedimentary rock hills to more erosion-resistant volcanic rock and granite formations. So the features are changing here as they go, and we'll see a drastic difference here. So Migdol will be actually the big landmark of this range of the mountains on their south here. Migdol actually means tower. And so recognizing that the Exodus sees the Gulf of Aqaba, the big mountain range over here on the south is naturally the towering Migdol here. So they're making the way down. It's day 11. Pharaoh has now caught up to Etham, so he's right behind them. So it takes him a couple days, about 4 days, to come down from Etham to the beachhead. And so that brings him to about day 18. So this would be in the Hebrew month Iyar the second. For us, it would be about Sunday, May 10th of 1446 BC, when they make it to the beach, and they're coming down from that 2200 elevation, 2200 foot elevation, down to about 55-foot elevation there at the Gulf of Aqaba. So they've gone the last 67 miles, a total of 272 miles from the start of the Exodus to the beach here on the shores of the Gulf of Aqaba. And Pharaoh's army is right behind them. So that's where we will be picking up next week with the arrival of Pharaoh's army here. Oh, here we go. Now for the cool visual aids for everything I've just been yakking about. Here we are. Went too far. Here we are at Etham. Right there. Got the whole world in his hands. So there's going over to Etham. There's the elevation we saw. There's coming down to Nuweiba. There's Etham going to Pi-hahiroth, right there, the mouth of the canyons. And we got that far. Six. Elevation coming down. Pi-hahiroth. Now here is Baal Zephon, this mountain way up here in the north. That's the big mountain they're talking about. That is Baal Zephon, also known as Mount Kilik. Let's pull it up here and take a look at this thing. This is the mountain that they are referring to. Now, it would be familiar with the patriarchs because as they were coming from Haran down into Canaan, they would have been within sight of this, and it would be very famous too for its religious significance. So as the patriarchs go from the promised land down into Egypt, they carry with them the knowledge of this place and the reference for this place. And of course, Moses and his travels and his education would be familiar as well. Hello. So this place is a big deal. Ooh, cave snot.
It's like they get snow.
Oh yeah, very much so. And flowers. So the mountains, as you see, come literally right up to the water here on the Mediterranean. In fact, let's go to the beach. Here's the beach right there at the base of the mountain. Scuba divers. You can ask Georgia if she's ever gone here scuba diving
I
to
think
see.
They go.
Ah. Ashley's boss and her husband, they do scuba diving, which is pretty cool.
All over, but usually
Yeah.
Hawaii.
Yeah,
Hawaii,
the more
Fiji,
tropical locations.
Fiji. So they went to the Philippines. She said that was very interesting.
So this is, yeah. I don't doubt that one bit.
Yeah. But hardest to get to.
Yes, that was a big, long travel for them, I remember.
Yeah.
So here's a picture taken by the space shuttle. So here we have the encampment at Etham, and here's Pi-hahiroth, the mouth of the cave. And look, it's facing Baal Zephon to the north. Zephon being the north. And so they'll come down here through the canyon to the beach right there. And this is the wilderness of Etham that surrounds the head of the Gulf. It overlaps the wilderness of Shur right here. I mean, here's that mountain range, the towering Migdal that the Bible refers to. So when you see these words, in fact, let's read chapter 14, verse 2 again, looking at this. So again, chapter 14, verses 1 and 2. Now the Lord spoke to Moses saying, tell the sons of Israel, they made it across to here, Tell them to turn back and camp in front of Pi-hahiroth between, and they'll come down to here. This is where they're going to camp. So they're going to pass through here and they're going to camp in between Migdol and the sea. So they'll have Migdol on the right and the sea on this side over here. Excuse me, let me rephrase it. They're going to camp, let me get actually the Hebrew order of the words here. Camp facing Pi-hahiroth, which is located between Migdol and the sea. And it faces Baal-zephon. You shall camp by the sea straight away from it. So they come straight out of the canyon and they camp on the beachhead right over there. So there are all those names in that verse and how they fit with each other. Yeah.
So the fact that they called this the Baal of the North. does
Yes.
that mean they did sacrifices?
Moloch was more often the god of child sacrifice, but there was some of that associated with Baal too.
That they worshiped up there.
Exactly. Yeah. In fact, there was also, yeah,
If it's called that
Mhm.
for a reason.
it's called that for a
yeah,
reason.
they
Yes.
worshiped up there. Or had a temple or
Yep.
a worship place.
There's also a place in this vicinity where they discovered a bunch of anchors laid in worship because this was a landmark for the sailors. Yeah. And they were continuing to dig in that until the Turkish government told them, no, you need to stop. Yeah. So back to our travels here. So they go from Pi-hahiroth down into towards the Einfertaga spring as they're entering the caverns here. And in fact, we're going to go down. You can see the windiness of their travels right there in that spring. So they're going to take 2.5 million people, men, women, and children with their flocks and herds and all of them through this narrow canyon and end up at the dead end of the beach. And Pharaoh hot on their trail, thinking it's a trap for them. So that will actually be a good place for pausing here and picking up next week with it all coming to a head at this beachhead. So any other reactions, thoughts, or questions on getting from Etham over here to the shore of the sea that they will be crossing? All good for now? Cool. Then we can go ahead and stop our screen share. Go ahead and stop that and stop our recording. And then we'll go from here and get ready to go into our